Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Lenny, Kenny on the Kenny and Lipton. Kenny
Thanks, Ruby.
Kenny and Sarah back for the fourth episode on this podcast that we've actually done together, because as soon as we start talking, we just go into a crazy amount of just awesome stuff that everyone can relate to and has struggled with at some point, because we just get it and we've worked with so many people towards so many different goals, and because they are just like me and we actually give a shit about people getting results that last, we go deep with our goals, and the mindsets are probably one of the biggest things that hold a lot of people back from getting results that last, from working through limiting beliefs, from breaking bad habits, which Sarah literally just put up a post on how where you are right now is a product of your long-term habits and lifestyle choices. And accepting that puts you back in the driver's seat. So with that, we're going to introduce this podcast with a little talkings on mindset and exactly how to break past these limiting beliefs and become aware of them.
Yes, thank you so much for having us back. We're so excited to be here.
Thank you, Ruby. It's funny. Someone actually called me Jenny today. So Lenny is like the second one. So it's all good.
At least Lenny, at least it was just like the first last name transposed. So it's totally fine.
Yeah. I guess my, it's all good.
But yeah, let's I definitely want to talk about like the post that I had made today. And it's funny, we were just actually talking about this on another podcast as well, and kind of just like looking back on my own journey, even as a coach, right? So we'll talking about the clients that are successful in this journey and the characteristics that they kind of hold, but also understanding just like your background. So I was talking about this again, like on another podcast the other day, and I have been going through a hormonal healing journey over the last 2 years. This is the first time that I'm attempting the fat loss phase in 2 years. And, I got to a point where my body wasn't responding to anything. Nothing that I did in the gym, no amount of cardio, no amount of dieting. My body was unresponsive. And it had taken a culmination of 10 plus years. So over a decade to get to that point. And I lived in high stress. I had an extremely high stress job. I was training to the utmost intensity and utmost failure all the time, never implementing deloads, never implementing any sort of breaks. I was dieting in between that, and then not being properly reversed. And because of that, it led me to essentially the hormonal imbalance from hell, where I had to do a lot of crazy things to get out of that. And I think a lot of, even just like speaking from a weight loss perspective, if you get to a point where you've been putting on weight and you're having a hard time losing it, those things didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight. It happened a culmination of all of your habits over several years, not even weeks, but several years. And getting to that point of feeling like anything you do isn't working, or the things that used to work for you are no longer working. And that happens for a reason, because you're getting to a point where your body is just not, you're trying to take from a body that can no longer give to you. And I think a lot of that has to do with just constantly looking for quick results and trying to get to an end result as quickly as you possibly can, and always chasing more. And it definitely, dials back to just instant gratification, which I think is a huge issue, especially with, the rise of social media. I think has definitely added to that instant gratification that a lot of people are looking for, but ends up setting them back further when they're chasing that.
I want to quickly add something to that Kenny will be able to easily go off. I shared this post that I saw in the inner circle, not the inner circle, with one of the female groups on Facebook with the co-coach therapist that I have. And it was one of a girl sharing her ab photos, but no one was really reading the actual caption that came with it, which was something to do with the fact that she keeps promising herself that she's going to try to eat cleaner, try to eat all the vegetables, but she keeps binging on these Oreos. And it's just like, people are in the comments saying goals, goal body. Oh, you have abs. It shouldn't matter anyway. But no one is actually like, no one's seeing what is actually being put there in the comments. Like, it looks innocent, but it's not innocent. It doesn't matter anyway if you got abs to show for it. Like, abs don't equal healthy. Abs don't equal success. I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, I mean that's wild. That's a great social experiment because you're right. Aesthetics don't necessarily, like physical aesthetics don't necessarily equate to internal health, right? And I think going off what Sarah had mentioned with the immediate gratification, if you look at the different, especially like the marketing tactics with, I would say mainstream fitness, a lot of it's geared towards weight loss, very fast weight loss, and making the scale a primary tool for determining whether you're succeeding or not. And the scale, it's an interesting thing because it can be used as a data tool, like for just tracking how you're doing overall. But I mean, I remember when I was in college, and this is when my fitness journey started. I used to really focus on the aesthetic goals as well, getting abs, getting bigger chest, and also looking at the scale to get leaner because I thought, oh, if the scale goes down, I'll get leaner. That's how it works. So calories in versus calories out. Got to make sure I'm eating less calories and just get smaller and leaner, whatever. But it is something where I think it's a major issue where people do equate a certain physical outcome with having also longevity, because health is one of those things where it can go both ways, where the physical is really emphasized very heavily, but the internal is not emphasized at all. But the irony is that internal health will typically lead to external results. And if you were just focusing on the external and doing extreme things, that can stress your body out. Like Sarah had mentioned, stress, it took her about 10 years of cumulative stress to finally have her body stop responding. Part of that stress for some people may be the way they diet, the way they exercise. And those things are often viewed as a positive, right? Like you go to the gym, it's a positive thing. You move around, it's a positive thing. You eat healthy, it's a positive thing. But typically it's at a surface level understanding of what it really means to do those things, because you can eat very healthy, but if you're eating at a caloric level that doesn't support basic hormonal function, then it's not healthy. And if you go to the gym 6 to 7 days per week and you're just absolutely killing yourself and it feels good at the moment, but you're not allowing yourself to recover at a very optimal level, then that's not healthy as well. And so I think there is this unfortunate misunderstanding that by doing certain things they automatically can get results, but it's a much deeper context to it. It's about having a balance with your life and a balance between what you enjoy and also doing things that do make you healthier, but not taking those things to such a far extreme where you do believe the more you put in, the more you get out of it. We have to talk about what exactly are you doing to put more in, because if you're doing steps that are not actually conducive to your results, even though they may be in the gym, they may be regarding a diet, then you may inadvertently be sabotaging yourself, because the intent and the intensity of what you're doing, these things really do matter. And it's not always black and white with doing one thing and getting something out of it. It could actually end up backfiring on you, which it did for both Sarah and I. Like for me, I ended up with a gut issue because I was doing basically a bulk, and the bulk went wrong. I wanted to eat more food, get bigger, get stronger, and at some point, I was also training to very heavy failure, and those things combined basically overstressed my body out, and it backfired. And it wasn't more is better. It's finding what is sustainable. Like sustainable is often better. Um, but yeah, I think the aesthetic results is something that is definitely overemphasized as important, and it really isn't that important. Because what's more important, in my opinion, now going through some serious health issues is your internal health, and the physical results will follow.
That's something that a lot of people
Yeah.
think about until it's too late, like the internal health. And then it's like they have to undo everything and take steps backwards in order to move forwards. It's almost like when people keep pushing a diet phase beyond its welcome, and then they end up going on some binge fest or overeating all the time or finding it way too hard. Like I'm sure you guys came across as well, but like in my past, I got to a stage where I couldn't even put food on the scale without having some panic attack because of how far I took my dieting phase. Like, you will have diet fatigue. That is what causes the biggest weight loss resistance. Your diet fatigue, because then you can't put in the effort anymore. Your motivation isn't going to be there anymore. And going off what you said with like what they see on social media, a lot of the time you see people saying, this is my 8-week progress. This is my 12-week progress. And people only go off that face value. Oh, how did you do this? I want this. Who's your trainer? What program are you doing? What's your diet like? People are always asking these questions to find out what are people doing, but it's like, they are not you. They don't have the same history as you. What they did to get to where they were is completely different from what you did to get to where you are now and where you're stuck. And what does it matter what they achieved in that 8 weeks, 12 weeks, if in 12 months' time they're back to where they started or worse? Or if what they did to get to that endpoint is unsustainable, unrealistic, their children were put onto eBay, their family was put onto Gumtree, and they couldn't even maintain like a steady workflow. Like there's that incongruence there, ambiguity, incongruence.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I kind of want to go back to the photo that you had mentioned with the girl showing her abs, but then talking about how she can't stop binging cookies and stuff like that, right? And I just want to kind of emphasize, and this is something that, as you were saying that, I was like, we had a client who came to us, she had estrogen dominance, like really, really bad. And she was taking painkillers because her periods were getting so bad, not even Motrin, but actual painkillers. And she couldn't function. She couldn't get out of bed because of how bad those things were. And she was having weight loss resistance because of it. Obviously, right, with estrogen dominance, oftentimes comes with weight loss resistance. And we finally had solved the issue of the estrogen dominance. We were able to get her levels back down to a good optimal range, and she no longer needed the pain pills. But one thing that really stood out to us was that she said, I might not be my leanest, but I'm definitely my happiest and my freest. And it's important to remember that your leanest isn't necessarily going to be your healthiest. It's not going to be your happiest. And it's definitely not going to be your freest. And I think people equate leanness to this like pinnacle of ultimate health, when honestly it might, like, everybody's genetically, it's different. Everybody's body will look different when they're at a certain weight, but at the end of the day, like, your leanest might not be your healthiest or your happiest. And I think that's something to take home and kind of remember, that building a lifestyle that's sustainable and being healthy and being happy with your body isn't necessarily going to be having visible abs. But I think the sooner people kind of realize that, the freer they're able to become and actually live healthier and more, having more longevity in their life.
yeah. I was gonna say there's even a lot of pain points that are pretty heavily emphasized in marketing as well, where going back to like the leanness, um, it's an immediate physical thing that you're able to kind of see for yourself, right? But I think there's a massive misunderstanding with what actually is going to lead to those things, and also allow you to keep them, right? Like Sarah said, your leanest is not going to be your freest, nor is it going to be, or I should say, your leanest most likely will not be your freest, or also most likely will not be your happiest. But it's funny. I was telling our friend Kara yesterday that there's a bit of an irony with what we do, because Sarah and I, we consider ourselves functional health coaches, right? And the fact that we have to use those words to describe ourselves as a functional health coach is very ironic to me, because it should be just a given that you as a coach are prioritizing your client's health. And because there's fat loss coaches, right? Like there are people who advertise for fat loss, and there's also major companies who advertise for major fat loss, and will just drive people into really hardcore diets. And even though they'll lose the weight fairly quickly, there really isn't at least like an intention for sustaining those results. And I think getting away from trying to rush the process, and rather just simply enjoying the changes, the subtle changes that are gradually going to happen, which is simply being healthier. I think those things are really, really important. But the only issue is that it's not sexy, nor is it, very marketable. How do you market something that, hey, I know this company is going to get you results in 30 days, but we'll get you results in maybe 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, depending on where you're at. It could also take a year potentially, depending on your history. But the good news is that you'll be able to keep those results, by the end of it all. I mean, that's like, well, shit, I'm going to go with the 30 days. Like, I don't want to wait for it. So it's kind of hard. And I think that's a challenge, because there is, at least from, what I'm seeing, there seems to be a shift in perspective with, seeing that the hormones do matter, and seeing that gut health matters, and these other internal factors that were once not sexy at all are starting to matter. But to the degree of it making an actual change, I don't know how far along we are. But it's ironic, unfortunately.
This is why I freaking love you guys so much as well, because you can tell that we are honestly the coaches who care. Like, we get so heartbroken when we see people struggling with the same things over and over again, and we will touch base on, like, not really babysitting, enabling, like, we will talk about that a little bit more in terms of how you can get your best results in a way that you can sustain them. But going off that as well, it's the unrealistic expectations that people put on themselves, especially when they try to get this leanness. It's like people don't even know what a realistic level of body fat is anymore. They're too busy hyper focusing on every single jiggly part on their body, or every single thing that moves that doesn't look like muscle, wanting to get off every little inch and cranny on their body, without realizing that that isn't actually realistic, and not everyone looks as shredded as what they look like on stage, because now there's so many people jumping to friggin' photo shoots and comp preps in ways that aren't sustainable anyway, especially when where you're starting from is so far from that, and you have to do something drastic to get there. That's for a one-day thing. You don't maintain a one-day body for life. And also with that, how when people hear it takes a year or it takes months, it just seems too long. Yet they're willing to jump to like this 12-week thing only to find themselves back at the start again.
Yeah. I mean, that if you take the amount of times that you have jumped in and out of diets and you add all of those up, how long is that? Honestly, probably years, maybe even decades. Because I've talked to a person on a consult call who started her first diet when she was 10 years old. 10. And she was 34. So that's like 2 decades worth of dieting. But a year's too long to dedicate to your goals. It's such a hard thing, because people can often become frustrated with us as coaches because we're not willing to do things with shortcuts or do things quickly. I even just talked about on my story because this is the first time that I'm entering into a fat loss phase in 2 years. And that's been really challenging from a mental standpoint. I'm not going to pretend that it hasn't been, but it has been very, very challenging to not want to do that. And to have to actually put on weight in order to get myself to a place where I can lose weight. But I put on my story today that, hey, if you want to follow along, you definitely can. I'm going to be kind of keeping track of all of this. The thing is that it's not going to be fast and it's definitely not going to be exciting. And I think that people need to understand that fast doesn't mean good, and that the faster you lose weight, the faster you'll rebound. So you kind of have to sit back and ask yourself, like, if you were to add up the amount of times that you dieted and then rebounded and had to continue that cycle, how long is that? And that can really kind of put in perspective for you how long you've actually been trying to reach your results, instead of just spending X amount of time to actually do things that are going to not only give you the results you want, but build a lifestyle around it so that you never have to diet again in a way that is unsustainable. And obviously, like, we're very passionate about this, and it's hard because essentially I think the best thing that you can do, and the clients that tend to be most successful who come to us, is that you kind of have to just let go and forget everything that you've ever heard and just trust that your coach has your best interest at heart. Because if you go in and you're like, well, this worked for me, a year ago, or this person said this, or I'm on TikTok and this person said this, you're not going to get anywhere. You're really not. So it's important that, like, the difference between those that succeed with us and those that do not are the ones that are truly surrendering to that process and kind of just like letting your coach do their job. There are crappy coaches out there, but if you find a good coach and they're taking the time and taking care of your health, and I understand it can be frustrating because it's taking a little bit longer, but if you can surrender to that process and give in to letting go of constantly needing an outcome, it will make it so much more enjoyable for you when you actually are at a place where you're happy, you're healthy, you feel good, you look good, and all of those things eventually come together.
It's funny, before you even mentioned the coach part, I wrote a note. The real results don't come with exciting measures. It's boring consistency. And a coach's job is to sift through the bullshit to stop you doing the dumb shit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, people think they need to change their macros every odd week, or people think they need the most exciting training program, or even the fact that something that I've been seeing a lot more recently, and I do wonder where people hear this stupid advice, is when, like, every 2 weeks you should be changing your program because otherwise your body isn't going to adapt and get results. Or when you stop, like, when you start to see a plateau, that's when everything needs to be changed up, because then you're not going to get results anymore. But we know that it's as soon as you start to see a plateau, that's when results are only just starting to happen, because now you can actually start to force more change, and change doesn't come without that force. Take that one away, Kenny.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
well,
yeah. Well, it's funny. Like, this is, and I want to touch on, like, the social media aspect, because Ruby, both you and Sarah made a good point, and this is where it gets really kind of screwed up, is that there's this desire from a creator perspective, right? Like, most of fitness media is on social media. It's going to be on TikTok, Instagram, whatever, or YouTube. And one of the main, methods to getting views and to grow your account is to basically make clickable titles. So for example, like, changing your workouts every 2 weeks, like, that is absolutely marketable. It's like, oh crap, I need to change my workouts every 2 weeks. I better follow this person and, better take notes, because there's a lot of variety. And also, just to touch upon this as well, where if you have too many chefs in the wheelhouse, it can be very, very confusing. And just know too, if you happen to compare yourself to another individual, like Ruby had mentioned, people wanting to get on stage, do a bodybuilding show of some sort. And this is part of the dark side, I guess you want to call it, of fitness is that, especially in the competitive world, a lot of individuals will use certain enhancements to make themselves look a certain way, and unfortunately, one of the I guess you can say one of the things that gets pushed out quite a bit from a social media perspective are people who happen to be enhanced. And for someone who's new to the gym and maybe realize this, and they're just legitimately trying to get healthier, stronger, and leaner as a natural individual, um, it may be discouraging, right? And just know too, I have nothing against people doing those things, but it's more so about the um, knowing of whether, like if you're promoting a certain way of doing something and you happen to be on something, but you're not letting your audience know, then that's when it becomes deceptive. Um, and when it comes down to, the gym and doing the quote unquote boring things, your movements don't have to change at all whatsoever, as long as you have good, solid movements. And what I mean by that is movements that are compound movements, such as like an RDL, a barbell row, a squat, and just know like there's many different variations of these certain exercises. But what can change is how you perform the exercise. So, for example, maybe you do a different tempo, the pace at which you lower the bar or lower the dumbbell versus the pace at which contract your muscle, or perhaps you add a few pauses. Another way you can change things up is rest times. You can maybe have a longer rest period to maximize strength, or you can do a shorter rest period to maximize metabolic output. So there's a lot of things that can change about the workout, but it's not necessarily the movement in itself. Because ultimately, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you get better at these movements and become a so-called quote unquote master of your own body. Because the more you practice these movements, the better you get at it. And the better you get at it, the more load you're able to basically lift. And the more load you're basically able to lift, the more strength you're going to get, the more hypertrophy you're able to potentially have, given that your recovery is good and given that your intensity is good. And speaking of intensity and intent, intensity is going to be, at least in my opinion, defined as to how far are you actually pushing yourself. So, for example, rep ranges. People get caught about rep ranges all the time. The lower you go, the more strength, I guess, adaptations you can get, and the higher you go, the more metabolic adaptations you can get. When I say metabolic, I mean like muscular endurance, that sort of thing. But just know that this rep range of 8 to 12, like for most people, this is actually a pretty good rep range, and the rep ranges in and of themselves aren't necessarily magical, but it's more so about how you're performing the reps within those rep ranges. So, for example, the quality of your movement is going to matter way more than your rep ranges. Like if you're practicing proper form, if you're actually slowly, and when I say slowly, I mean in control, like you're able to control the movement. A lot of people will just sling the weights, let them drop to the floor. Like you don't want to do that. You want to have some control over the weight. And also, are you practicing explosive concentrics or explosive contractions? These are ways that you can actually emphasize strength. This is ways that you can emphasize muscle growth and also tendon strength. So there's a lot of things that you can change, but the movements in and of themselves, you don't really have to change. And people who are telling you to quote unquote confuse your muscles and change up your workouts, like these people are either one, they don't know what they're doing, or two, they're blatantly lying to you to get some more views or clicks. And I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, but it's pretty insane to see what social media has to offer sometimes. And most of it, unfortunately, is for pure entertainment value, which is unfortunate, because if you are to look at, these, and I say bodybuilders because bodybuilders are people who have achieved incredible amounts of not just strength, but incredible amounts of muscle building, right? These are individuals who have mastered hypertrophy. Whether or not they're using drugs, right, it doesn't matter. Their methods are maximizing their potential. And if you were to look at these individuals, most of the time their movements are not changing at all. Like they're doing the same thing all the time. And it can be very boring. It's like, whoa, this guy has done barbell rows for how many years now? Like he hasn't changed it. Like, what is that? But it's really most of the time it looks appears boring, but the fun, at least for me, comes with knowing why you're doing it. Like if you don't know why you're doing something, then it's probably not going to be fun. But if you understand the reason for the boringness, what do you want to call it, it all of a sudden it can become very invigorating. It can become very motivating. And I think I think a lot of people get confused about that because Weider, I know I'm talking a lot here, but like Joe Weider, who is Arnold Schwarzenegger, or who was Arnold Schwarzenegger's mentor, and really kind of the father or godfather of the golden era, he had a set of principles that were kind of laid out for these 70s bodybuilders. And one of the principles, I think, was principle 11 or 9, was muscle confusion. And the whole concept of muscle confusion wasn't necessarily to, literally confuse the muscles by changing your workouts or shock the muscle, right, as Arnold puts it, but rather it was a way to mentally become more invigorated with your workouts. Because if you look at Arnold and the way he said shock the muscle, he was referring to training to failure. He was referring to training with super high intensity. And it wasn't about like, oh, I'm going to, I did barbell rows yesterday, so I'm going to do, pull downs today, like to shock the muscle. Like that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that these are two movements that can build the back, but the shocking principle is about the intensity and the intent behind it. And Joe Weider was simply providing a different idea as to how you can mentally invigorate yourself, because mentally, if you're willing to go somewhere, then your body's going to follow. And training to failure is very, very hard. Building muscle is very, very hard. So it's something that you need to learn how to do.
I would also say that back then there wasn't really that much education around how progress actually happens. So of course he's going to throw something out like that, because you do the best that you can until you know better. And now that we know better, we don't go by those outdated principles anymore. But something that you said, which I loved as well, is when it comes to the intensity you put behind something. Actually, no, it was when you said why you're doing something. If you don't know why you're doing something, well, you bloody know well your why. It's just that you get lost in the instant gratification, the wanting results now, the chasing numbers all the time. If it's not chasing numbers on the scale, you're chasing numbers in the gym. And if you're going to get warped up in just wanting more, thinking that progress is linear, that you're always going to increase your weight every single week, which you're not. You're likely to even increase it every single fortnight, especially for upper body as a female. I said this before as well, because you can only realistically lift so much with your upper body. We have weak upper bodies, and especially the delts. If you're trying to go up from like pounds, kilos, whatever, but if you're trying to increase one every single week, very soon you're not going to be taxing the side delt anymore. You're going to be using your whole body movements. You're going to be using your chest, your back, your freaking legs, because you're going to be bouncing up and down like some pogo stick. Your why, you know what you want. You know that it's a body goal. You know that you want to look good. Load is only one tool in the toolbox, and chasing strength doesn't automatically equate to looking good in a certain way. Like there are plenty of strong people out there that either have so much body fat on them or as lean as a fiddle, because they're not training for the goal of developing a jacked physique, like a sculpted physique. Your wants and your actions aren't aligned because you don't know what it takes to get to your goal. And like you mentioned with like the rep range 8 to 12, you can gain muscle at like 20 or you can gain muscle at 25, but most of you won't be doing that because you're going to mentally tap out before you physically take your muscles close to failure if you go beyond 12 to 15. And how you perform them. Like a lot of people, I like this part that you mentioned. If you see me train, if you see Sarah train, if you see Kenny train, you will see us doing a lot of the same meat and potato exercises. But it almost goes over people's head when they see us do that stuff, because they're too busy looking for the cool shit that they can poke an eye at. It's like the stuff that you're so used to seeing is just like the back of your hand. You don't think twice about it. But that's the reason why we get better at it. And then if you see me, like when I came back to doing deadlifts again, because you know that I tore my hamstring, when I came back to doing deadlifts again, and you can see me with like digit deadlifts, how did you get, like, people expect to just increase their strength as fast as I did. Like, bro, I was deadlifting like double what I'm deadlifting now. So of course I'm going to get my strength back that fast because I've done it before. Don't compare where you are and your progress to someone else, because you don't know jack shit about them half the time.
Exactly. I mean, it's funny. I used to do the same thing where I would go on social media and I would compare my. Yeah, there was to this day I would be hesitant to post my stories, my workouts on my stories on Instagram, because it was literally the same thing every week. I was like, this is be boring. Like I'm literally doing the same thing every day, and it's funny because I enjoy it, but to advertise it, it's like, oh, there goes Kenny, he's doing RDLs again, or there goes Kenny, he's doing bicep curls again. Like, wasn't he doing this for like weeks? It's like, yeah, I have been doing this for weeks, but I'm getting better at them, and it's funny. It's you can't really compare your progress to someone else's, and I think going back to like the why, I think at a surface level, you do understand that you go to the gym, you're going to get results like that. That's why you're going, right? But to understand the deeper why, like why should you change your workouts so frequently? I think that tends to be missing.
Just remind me of something I wanted to say, because it was part of that question thing. When people think that just because you're slowly plateauing now, that you need to change your program to see results, that is the purpose of resistance training, to actually adapt to that exercise. And your body is going to get sore. It's going to improve a lot quicker at the beginning because you're learning how to fire neurons in the right sequence, how to recruit the muscle fibers that are needed, because some might not be firing until you actually get the body used to performing that movement. You might be unstable at first, and then you start to get some stability, you start to get some control, and then through repetition you get better, and then you keep increasing to a certain point. Now that you got to that point, you need to fight for every single little bit of progress from there, and that is where your muscles start to change. But that is also where most people go to a new program, because it's been 6 weeks now, we need to change it up. And then they just come out with a friggin' wig and paint their skin another color, so that it just looks like a completely something, like nothing looks the same.
Yeah, it's funny. And Sarah, if you want to touch upon this as well, with programming, period, and I can never pronounce this.
Periodization.
Yes, thank you. I think that's very, very important. And looking at the example of your actual exercises, right? Obviously, if you have like a spine loading exercise and you've been doing it for weeks and you've been lifting heavy, then maybe yes, you'll probably take that away and give yourself a break. But for the most part, when we're talking about those rep ranges, right, and going from very low rep ranges to say higher rep ranges, and then also talking about like rest times where we have very long rest times for maximizing hypertrophy, right? Like you get a greater chance at trying to get closer to failure, right, with a larger load. But for someone who has been hammering themselves like to no end, where like Ruby had mentioned, where you're fighting for that last rep and fighting for that just little bit of progress, right? At some point, at least in my opinion, I think it is important to kind of focus on different energy systems where, for example, if we look at hypertrophy focused training, right, versus say something that's more metabolic. Metabolic training, and the way we program, there's something called local lactic, which is basically yeah. So for those that are listening, so local lactic, it's a form of training where basically you have shorter rest times, and it's usually done in a superset fashion, and you're basically pairing certain muscle groups together, and you're creating this basically a large pump, but the pump is this accumulation of what's known as lactate, and the lactate is basically a waste product, and the waste product will be filtered to your liver. The liver is going to metabolize it. It's going to be under stress. And because of that, it's going to actually make you healthier. It's going to make your liver healthier. And a way you can, say, get over a plateau, let's say you're plateauing at, a certain level, whether it's strength or hypertrophy, whatever it may be, and you're really stressed out, you can switch over to a different stimulus. You can have the same exercises, but the way you're doing the exercises can change the entire adaptation, and you can have better recovery. And with that better recovery, you can eventually go back into just going, just going crazy with your workouts. And next thing you know, you get past that plateau. So there's different ways to train, but when you do change your program, it should be done so with an intention to maybe better your health or maybe better your systems, as opposed to, I'm bored as hell, I'm going to change this and let's hope for the best. Like that shouldn't be the case, at least in my opinion.
I want to do a bridging to then pass this over to Sarah to relate this to dieting, because I just made a really good bridging between this. And the way that you were saying that is why it's so important to not just keep chasing progress in one direction, because you can't just keep getting stronger to know its end, because otherwise you'd be literally lifting houses and trucking cars. Different forms of stress on the body all have a role in where you want to go, and you tax different energy systems. That's where strength, that's where like the lower reps, but like just focusing on getting stronger, focusing on getting a metabolic stimulus. They are all different stress systems that will deload your body in other ways. Like you won't be so neurologically or brain taxed from chasing just heavier loads. Now you can create that in a different way. But this is why periodization is so important. And then we can see that. Like we can actually see that because there's no emotions tied to it. But as soon as it comes to dieting and the fact that you need to periodize your dieting, the fact that you can't be in a fallow space forever, the fact that you can't chase a lower number on the scale forever, all of a sudden emotions win over and periodization doesn't exist anymore. And the idea that you can't keep doing the same diet that you did to lose the fat as you do to maintain it just baffles a lot of people's mind, because it's like, as soon as I eat more, I'm going to gain weight. Well, no, you're not meant to do the same shit that you did to lose the weight that you do to keep it off. So that's a perfect transition for you.
Yeah, that's a really heavy topic for a lot of people. I think a big issue, let's start with ballast phases in general, or when people are trying to lose weight, oftentimes they will set themselves, and for some reason, and I still don't know why, the most popular number is 1,200 calories. Let me just say that if you're putting yourself inside of a box of eating 1,200 calories because that's what you heard, everyone's body is different. Everyone's like capacity to handle calories and how they handle calories is going to be different. But I will say the biggest thing is that jumping to 1,200 calories is not the answer. It's not a magic number. It's not going to deliver the results that you're looking for. But a lot of times with dieting is that people just, they slash their calories super, super low, and then they stay there for weeks on end. And this is what sets you up for pretty much starting a metabolic adaptation very quickly. So this is why you end up plateauing. This is why you're eating super low calories for weeks on end, and then all of a sudden you're not losing weight anymore. And in some cases, some extreme cases, you actually start gaining weight on the calories that you once were losing weight on, because you are metabolically adapting to those calories. And this is why the periodization of not only training, but the periodization of your your diet also matters. This is where diet breaks come in. This is where refeeds come in. This is where untracked meals might come in to give you that metabolic bump. And what happens is like when people are spending weeks on end eating super low calories and then not implementing anything to upregulate your thyroid or your sex hormones, or you bring down your cortisol levels, you end up in this perfect storm to just create just weight loss resistance or that metabolic adaptation. And I think people are always afraid to feed themselves up, thinking that that's not, I'm dieting. Why would I eat more? Why would I implement more carbs, or why would I increase my calories? So things like refeeds, that's what I would consider like the periodization of your nutrition when it comes to a fat loss phase. Is you don't always want to just have straight calories and just sticking to those. The refeeds, like I said, will upregulate your thyroid. Refeeds are meant to be mostly carbohydrates. So if you're in a dieting phase, this is meant to upregulate your thyroid, which is the master of your metabolism. So you don't run into that wall and that plateau, and you're able to extend your fat loss phase in a much healthier manner versus just digging yourself into a hole trying to eat low calories where you shouldn't be in the first place. 1,200 calories is not a magic number. This is why it's also important to put yourself into a maintenance phase so that you are at a higher set point from a calorie perspective. So you're not cutting and you're not trying to lose weight on extremely low calories. And this is why it takes so much time when you're doing things, when you're accounting for your health and also accounting for the fact that you want to keep results that you get. Not to say that you're going to stay at a super low body fat percentage all the time, but at least you're able to maintain your muscle tissue and change the way that your body looks overall. A big thing that I kind of like to say is that your goal weight and your goal body, they're not the same thing. Like, they are not the same thing. I will tell you that I had a goal weight of hitting 104 pounds. That was my goal weight. I was like, if I hit this, I will be happy. I will be so confident in my body. And let me tell you, I got down to 102 and I was like, this is terrible. I hate this. I have no muscle. I still have so much fat. And I think that's where the term skinny fat comes from. And when I got my goal body, I was at 120 pounds, like vast difference. So that's also a common misconception is you're trying to lose weight on low calories, but losing weight and losing fat are not the same thing. If you want to have that, I hate using this word, but if you want to have that toned look, it's basically building muscle and revealing that muscle underneath body fat. You're not losing weight. Your weight might not even change when you go through, a fat loss versus when you first start losing body fat. The goal is to get your body to respond on the least amount of stimulus, and that goes for your dieting too. So if you can lose weight on higher calories or lose body fat on higher calories, why wouldn't you want to do that? So like I said, implementing things like refeeds and doing the periodization of your nutrition, diet breaks. This sounds like a crazy concept to go through. And what refeeds and what diet breaks are is just a period of overfeeding and increasing your calories and bringing them up to your perceived maintenance for like a couple days or maybe a week to give your body a break and bring your cortisol levels down, upregulate your thyroid. That it's going to allow you to lose more body fat, hold on to your muscle tissue more efficiently through a fat loss phase. So that's my 2 cents on the dieting aspect with the periodization of that.
I'm going to throw something back at you, but at the same time, I don't know where this more came from. Like, why would you not want to get the most results you can out of doing the least? Like, you have a life to live. It's not all meant to be centered around living in the gym and living in freaking diet prison. And did you see that post I put up as well with, would you rather your goal weight or your goal body? Like, that is an important question to ask yourself, because they are not one and the same, especially if the weight that you're putting on yourself, like the goal weight that you're putting on yourself, is something to do with where you were in the past before you developed a habit of going to the gym, before you developed any muscle, or if you gave birth and your body completely shifted and morphed, you are not going to get back to that same weight. And you're not going to, like, that's the other thing. Like, people are so afraid of gaining weight or becoming a certain weight again because their memory of being that weight was one with extra body fat that they weren't even confident in the past. You are not that person anymore. What you've done now has built a new body of muscle, of habits, of consistency. If you do it the right way and develop the lifestyle, you will not go back to that body. But if you do take one of these shortcut approaches and you, like Kenny was talking about before, I wrote this down as a note to come back to, marketing, good sales coaches, good trainers, good people that want to get another ticket out of you because you're not a client, you're another ticket. They know how to sell to your pain points. You giving into that is just going to revert you back to where you were before. So yeah, you will end up with that body again that you didn't like, that you weren't confident in, but only worse. But if you do this the right way, you will not end up in the same shell that you were in last time. You have created a new shell. But back to what I wanted to throw at you, macro checks, macro calculators, and macro coaches, how they can actually be doing a disservice to a lot of people.
Whew. Whew. Okay. Here's the problem with those macro calculators, apps. They're a one-size-fits-all approach. They're not accounting for your environment. They're not accounting for your stress levels. They're not accounting for your sleep. They're not accounting for any of these things. They're not accounting for, hey, I am a mom of 4 and I am moving like all day and I don't sit still. They're not accounting for, I mean, they're accounting for that, like your activity level, but they're not accounting for your environment and your lifestyle and who you are as a person. One thing that I kind of like to say is that fitness should complement your life, not consume it. So like what Ruby, you were saying in terms of like, you're trying to build a life outside of these things and outside of constantly dieting and not feeling the need to do that anymore. And I think a lot of times these macro calculators and a lot of these apps, MyFitnessPal especially, for some reason is so notorious for setting your calories extremely low. They're not accounting for they're not accounting for you as an individual. And that's the problem, is that you think you're getting something individualized because you're putting numbers into a calculator or a formula, but it's not considering all the things you are as a human. And that's a huge problem. So this is where like a coach comes into play, because we're able to assess so many different things, so many different variables that a calculator or a machine isn't going to account for. And I think it's a big problem. Like I had a conversation with someone who was using I forget what app it was, but they had them in a dieting phase where it was like they started them out at like 1,300 calories, and this is where they started them for a dieting phase. And this person was extremely active, training 5 days a week. And was struggling with weight loss resistance because she had been following this for like several weeks and was starting to actually see the repercussions of that, because it's not going to make the adjustments needed to offset the amount of stress that you're placing on your body that a coach might be able to understand and see with all the biofeedback that you're putting in a check-in. So it's problematic because it does not consider you as an individual.
It's funny because I was scrolling and I saw Ben Carpenter and Zayat put up posts about this, and I love Jordan Zayat, but this post was like, every time he talks about this, I get really annoyed, because he gives like a specific of your target goal weight times this particular number equals the calories. Number one, fuck no, because a lot of people's goal weights are way further like down than it should be. Like if you're 300 pounds or 100 kilos and then you put a goal weight of I want to be 50 or 60, that is going to screw you up, number one. Number two, there is no activity multiplier in that, which is what Ben Carpenter actually brought up on someone else's post that was putting out like these numbers, I'll stick to this. But then he's just like, yeah, but that is okay as a generic, but it doesn't take into account what this other person, he brought up another post, shows, is your activity multiplier. Like there are so many different things. I'm going to get Kenny to follow up on this one later on with the coaches. Like there are so many things that a coach takes into consideration and why a coach is so important. that a generic macro check, a generic calculator is not going to do for you. And this is why there are multiple diets out there that never get people the results that they want to see, because where's the consistency? Where's the accountability? Where's the program that's tailored to you? Where's the mindset? And the biggest thing, emotional regulation. Where's all of that? What's going to happen when you go on vacation? They don't teach you that. But
yeah,
before we click to record, because I want to include this in what you're going to say, before we click to record, we were talking about how people need to put in a certain effort as well to expect a certain result. And at the same time, you need to realize that that realistic expectation around that is the main driving factor, because it's not about willpower and it's not about motivation and sometimes not even discipline. It's that you don't truly understand what you need to do to get to where you want to be. And it's on a level 10 rung when you haven't even started climbing the ladder. Go for it.
Did you just Kenny disappeared? I don't know where he went. So yeah, it's with effort. People think that they need to be going 100 miles per hour all the time, right? And that's definitely not what we're speaking about in terms of giving effort and putting time into the gym, and putting time and effort into your dieting. It's the consistency over the long haul is what matters. But you can't expect optimal results if you're not giving max effort, meaning that you're showing up to check-ins, you are inputting all of the information that your coach needs, that you're being consistent with your diet about 80% of the time, that you're hitting your workouts. It's rather simple, but people tend to overcomplicate it. I don't know what's going on, Kenny. But people tend to overcomplicate things, and then I think it is paralysis by analysis at that point, where people overthink what it is that they need to be doing, and then they almost self-sabotage in a way, because they overcomplicate it. It's about getting your daily movement in. It's about getting your protein in, your water, your sleep, working through the stress mitigation practices. I wanted to give Kenny a chance to answer as well. If we wanted to, Kenny, do we want to ask the question again so Kenny knows what we're talking about?
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, we're talking about what we were talking about before we clicked record on the whole. You need to align your expectations with the level of not only commitment that you're giving it, but the ability that you're able to give it right now, because what you're able to do in one phase isn't what you're able to do forever. But also touching on the calculators with like Syed and Carpenter.
One thing before you get into that, Kenny, one thing that I wanted to say too, is just with the calculators and coaches, like it also doesn't account for your history. Like it's not accounting for your dieting history and your training history either. So like that is like a huge component when it comes to setting you up for success, is accounting for your overall history. Sorry, Kenny, go ahead.
No, yeah, that was great. I was also going to say that, with Ruby, you had mentioned something about, having a weight goal and a goal body, and having this kind of fear with a certain weight. I do want to say that your body and your health, irrelevant to what weight it is defined by your habits and your behavior. So if you are now doing new habits and new behaviors, you happen to hit that same weight on the scale that maybe had in the past been traumatic for you because you were just not the greatest, physique or greatest health. It really doesn't matter. Weight is all relative. And what really matters is your habits, and your habits will define what ultimately you're going to feel like and look like, and just kind of even mentally feel like as well. But in terms of the calculators and all that stuff, it's funny. I agree with everything Sarah had mentioned, where it doesn't really necessarily give you everything you need to know. It gives you a good, or I shouldn't say good because it's hard to say. It gives you a starting point, right? And just based off the numbers that you were able to type into those calculators, it like Sarah had mentioned, it makes you feel like it's custom. It's custom in accordance to what the algorithm is able to handle, but it's not custom in the sense that, you know, it's literally considering your entire life. And I think a lot of people don't realize that it's not just the gym, it's not just the diet that matters, but it's really your overall lifestyle. This is why fitness is, you know, often touted as a lifestyle, because literally what you do outside the gym matters just as much as what you do inside of it, especially from a habit and also just kind of behavioral perspective. So, for example, if you're someone who is, you know, constantly chugging caffeine, or perhaps someone who, you know, has a really kind of rocky sleep schedule, or maybe you're constantly stressed, you know, these things matter and can negatively affect what you're doing in the gym. Even if your calculator was, you know, quote unquote perfect, it's going to affect those things. And, you know, the role of a coach is really to, at least in my opinion, teach you what your body is able to handle. And when it comes down to different parts of your journey, like that word journey, fitness journey is used quite a bit. And I think it's an appropriate word, honestly, because journey kind of describe, at least in my opinion, it immediately reminds me of Lord of the Rings, where Frodo begins in, you know, the Shire, and he's all happy, you know, it's like nothing's going wrong. And then next thing you know, Gandalf rolls upon his footstep and he's like, yo, we're gonna go across hell and back to burn this ring. And you're like, Frodo's like, what the fuck? And so like there's this whole journey that happens. Um and you know, throughout a journey, there's gonna be many ups and downs, right? And during those ups and downs and during those different phases of your journey, there's going to be different capabilities that your body's able to handle. So, for example, going back to what Sarah had mentioned, and also Ruby, if you're someone who has been chronically stressed out for, say, years on end, right? And you haven't necessarily changed your habits in a positive way, meaning that your habits are actually getting you closer to where you need to be, then it's going to take a little bit longer than 30 days. It's going to take a little bit longer than, say, 3 months. It's what do you say, Ruby?
That's perfect. There we
go. Yeah, and it's going to take, could take a long time. And I think kind of embracing that concept of this being a journey, at least in my opinion, it can mentally prepare you for what's to come, right? Because you could be in the Shire in the very beginning. You think everything's good and dandy, and you just need to do this 30-day thing, but then you realize very quickly that, oh crap, I'm in the middle of Mordor now, and I'm miles away from the Shire. Like, what the hell do I do? And you just kind of have to operate with what your body's able to handle. And I think this is where a lot of people fall off, because it's really hard. It's really hard, and it can be very disappointing at times, especially when it comes down to trying to figure out what is going to work. And as a coach, it's really hard sometimes from just a almost like a heartfelt perspective, just because you want the person to obviously get the results. You want the person to feel better and happier, but depending on how severe, the chronic stress that this person was experiencing, and how long the duration of that chronic stress they were experiencing. And I use the word stress because the stress can come in many forms, and stress is usually what causes these negative adaptations to take place in the beginning, right? So stress can be many things. It's an umbrella term to capture whatever is happening in your life. And so in order to kind of peel away the quote unquote damages or negative adaptations that your body has gone through, your body's not damaged, it's repairable, but it's just adapted in a negative way, a way that you don't want it to adapt, right? It may take some time, and it may take some almost how do you say this, mindset shifting, because if you're ambitious and you want to get to a certain goal, that ambition can be kind of destructive at the same time. What I mean by that is it's good to be ambitious. It's good to want to strive for more, but at the same time, you have to watch yourself, because the more ambitious you are, there's this tendency that you may want to get there quicker. And because you're not at the goal that you can achieve, that ambition can sometimes bleed into negativity, and it can bleed into self-doubt. It can bleed into almost this imposter syndrome. And you really got to be careful with that, because sometimes the changes that need to happen aren't physical. The changes that need to happen could be mental. It could be things that are happening internally that you may not even know. You may not even see it in real time. And this is where it gets, again, very difficult and becomes part of a journey. Um, and when your body is ready to have physical changes, it's often in result of you fixing what's going on internally, and not just from a hormonal GI perspective, but primarily, if not entirely, your mental perspective as well, because mentally this can all downstream to everything else and make things really bad. But I would say a coach's job, at least in my opinion, is to help the client see their potential, and also let them, kind of be set straight in terms of like the realistic expectations, but at the same time making sure to really provide a lot of clarity, because it can be really disheartening sometimes, where especially with functional issues, very severe functional issues like Sarah. I mean, what she went through was really, really awful, especially from a mental perspective. So I think it's really, really important to set realistic expectations, but always ask your coach, why are we doing this and what can I expect? And being willing to be open to their answers, because sometimes it's not the answer you want to hear, but it may be the answer that you need to get to the next step.
Sometimes a lot of people already know the answers to something. It's just that they keep trying to find some other answer. So they keep asking more questions that don't even need to be asked half the time, which is where the babysitting comes in. It's like, the purpose of the phase. There comes a point where asking more questions isn't actually doing you a service. Maybe highlight a little bit on the babysitting there as well before I actually mention what I wanted to mention.
Yeah. And so, like, there is a difference between babysitting and well, actually, babysitting slash enabling versus being, holding someone accountable. Holding someone accountable is trying to get someone to change their behaviors, but changing them by them fully understanding and acknowledging what they're doing and why it's not the best, versus babysitting slash enabling, where the coach is now trying to literally get the client to do what they need to do. So it's like a 50-50 relationship. We lay out the plan, we give out the protocol, and we're obviously there to talk and discuss and bring out certain mindset shifts, but ultimately it's up to the client to do the work, right? Like if the universe or God himself, whatever you want to call it, like was like, here is thy fitness plan. It is the greatest fitness plan of all the universe. Like, even if you had this amazingly incredible fitness plan that came from the universe itself, the gods, and you didn't do the job, it still wouldn't translate into results, right? Like, you still need to do the job.
That's where you need to have like what you're in line with the actions you're willing to do, because like if it's like, why am I doing this as your question, it's like, well, how has what you've been doing for however many years been working for you? It's time we needed a break away from this. It comes a point where it's just like, it's not so much why am I doing this, it's more why haven't you done this before, if all you've been doing for the past 5, 6, 10 years has been recycling the same old beliefs, listening to the same narratives. Because you see this in Facebook as well, where people dismiss you if you're saying something that doesn't align with their values or beliefs, when the message that you're actually allowing yourself to listen and say, oh, that makes sense, Well, of course it freaking makes sense, because that's exactly what's had you stuck before, and listening to that same advice is going to keep you friggin' stuck. Like, there comes a point where you need to stop just trying to figure out why this is this way, why that's that way, and just do the work and see it for yourself. Because the greatest teacher is experience, but you'll never experience if you're too busy questioning, trying to find the optimal this, optimal that. Just do consistently. Consistently includes weekends, and it means for longer than just a couple of weeks. Like a month or two. Like, you need to do the work, and you need to be honest with the work you're doing, because like, you can trust a process, but why trust a process if you're not actually doing the process? There's action and wanting to make action happen. Like, you're not Harry Potter. You can't make, I'm not a Lord of the Rings fan, so I'm going to make another Harry Potter reference very soon, but it's not like you can just Harry Potter to reality. And like we were saying before, like, it's your current habits, beliefs, mindset, all that kind of stuff that led you to where you are now. And just because you're doing the right things, I see this all the time. People start doing the right things. They start listening to what you're saying. They train hard. They put in the steps. They tick off all the boxes. It's been a week. Okay, let's do it again. And then again, and then again. And then they show up every single day. They do their best. They're putting their effort. That doesn't mean you're going to get results. And you're not going to just get results like that and see them. There is a time lag between implementation and seeing the results. Just because you're doing your best and you're doing hard work, you're not going to see the results in 2 freaking weeks. Like, shit takes time. It's took years of habits, beliefs, actions to get you to where you are now. And they weren't ideal for you. So now you need to build, repeat, and cement in new habits, new beliefs, like you said, identity shifts, to create a new level of living, because this shit takes time. And now the Harry Potter analogy, you walked 50 miles into the woods / the maze. You need to come the 50 miles out of the woods / the maze, but you can't come out the same way you went in, because just like the Harry Potter maze, it closes in on you. The only way out is through. I freaking love Harry Potter. And that goblet of fire scared the living bejesus out of me. So
that's a good one.
That's another thing as well, though. It's going to scare the living bejesus out of you. Something you've never done before. And you want that goblet of gold. You want that at the end. So you need to put in the work, and you need to put yourself through that discomfort to get to the end. Sarah, maybe you can take that one on through with how, like, people trying to lose weight for years on end, they've been struggling for months. Taking a break from chasing fat loss doesn't mean you're going to be gaining weight automatically. It just means that your actions need to be focused on one thing. Like, they could be focused on weight loss, but your mindset needs to start focusing on something other than just trying to shrink your body. And that's
and you can't. That was an excellent analogy. I've never seen Harry Potter, so don't come at me, but that was really, really good. But when you're going through a process, and this is why I said in the beginning, like, if you hire a coach and you're letting all of this other noise, like, distract you from what is it you're having your coach do and why you hired your coach in the first place, you're not going to get anywhere. Like, you truly have to kind of surrender to the process and the fact that it's going to be a journey. And like you said, like, it's not an overnight thing. It's not a 2-week thing. It's not a 4-week thing. It is dedication for a very long period of time, even on days that you don't feel like you want to do it. But you have to see it through if you really want to get to where you want to be. And you can't have 1 foot out the door and 1 foot in. You can't do that. It's not going to work. And, as a coach, like, we can't build upon your goals and what it is that you want to do. We can't change anything. We can't change what's not being done consistently. We can't build on what's not being done consistently. And the only way to do that is if you are consistent, and that is your job as a client. We can, like Kenny said, we can give you the best plan in the world. We can give you all the best supplements, all the best this and that. But if you're not executing consistently, none of it is going to matter. And, kind of just going back to just my experience over the last 2 years, I had to do protocols that were really crazy. And I was, and I want to say this because I think it's important to be transparent as a coach, that I had my own coach and I was going through things that were really tough. And there were times where I doubted if I could even continue. Like those things are going to happen. You're going to get frustrated. Things are going to be hard. You're going to question, like, can I do this? Am I meant for this? Is my body actually going to change? Those things come up. But the difference is being able to correct that from a mindset perspective and say, yes, I can. I'm going to see this through. I can do this, right? That's the difference. Because when you start having that self-doubt, it's not to say that those things don't come up. It's being able to kind of correct it and continue down your path to getting to where you want to be. I spent the last year and a half and I gained 25 pounds. And that was the hardest thing I've ever done because I've identified as a fit chick for so long. And that was essentially taken from me. And I didn't know who I was anymore because I wrapped myself so much in my outward appearance versus what was happening inside of me. I was my unhealthiest when I was at my leanest. I was mentally unhealthy. I was physically unhealthy. Just kind of going back to that. And that's why you can't always spend your entire life trying to shrink yourself down. It is not healthy. And if you want to get yourself to a place where your body does respond, you have to do things other than fat loss. You have to do things that might feel so uncomfortable, but it's going to get you to the place that you want to be. And that's why I'm saying you have to, you can't have one foot in a fat loss phase and one foot in a maintenance phase or trying to put on muscle. What good is losing body fat if you have no muscle to show for it, if you're trying to build an aesthetic body? You're going to lose a bunch of fat, but you're not going to have anything to show for it if you don't take the time to do what's necessary to build muscle. And let me tell you, maintenance phases and building phases they're the funnest phases to be in. Fat loss is just such a, I feel it's such an overrated thing. I think it's great, obviously, right, to achieve that. But I often think that people overlook the things that are going to make you feel really, really good. And are going to set you up to achieve fat loss more sustainably and more effortlessly if you do the things that are not fat loss. The whole goal of a maintenance phase, and I think Jordan Syatt actually said this, and I really, really love this. Maintenance doesn't mean that you're stagnant. People often misconstrue maintenance as being stagnant. Oh, I'm going to be stuck at this weight. I'm going to be stuck at this size or whatever. I'm going to be stuck at this body fat percentage. Maintenance is a momentum phase. Maintenance is momentum to getting yourself to a place where you can efficiently lose body fat in a healthy way, period.
And I think people build, you can build.
Yeah, exactly. It recomposition is such an underrated thing, but it's so funny because every client that goes from chronically dieting for years and then suddenly comes to us and they start losing body fat and building muscle and the shape of their body completely changes, they're so much happier. Every single one. It is such an underrated thing to do because mainstream fitness is constantly talking about fat loss or weight loss, not even fat loss. They're talking about weight loss. And people just get wrapped up in this and they're missing out on so many great things to fitness and health that will just better them overall. And building muscle isn't just for looks either. Your body was made to have muscle from a health standpoint. It's not just for aesthetics purposes. Building muscle is necessary for your longevity and your vitality. It's such an underrated thing.
I said this on the last podcast I did as well, where most people who come to any of us can actually recomp because the shit that they were doing before was not conducive to their long-term goals. And then there will come a point where you do need to push yourself into a slight surplus to gain muscle. But the thing is, you need to focus on where you are now. And that's just to stop doing dumb shit because that's what's keep you trapped for so long. And with the whole healing journey as well, everyone's healing process, which doesn't always have to be physical because a lot of people haven't got themselves to that physical point. It's mental because it's not physical because you ended up overeating for half the time. So you didn't put yourself into such a metabolic cascade by staying too lean. Instead, it's just the mental aspect that needs the healing. And the way that you go through your journey to begin your next fat loss phase is different from the next person. And people can lose. I have girls that lose weight in that period before fat loss because it's just implementing foundations that you've never done before, which is why it is so important not to overreach, not to underestimate that. To sum this all up, there is something I really wanted either one of you to talk about that's really important, and that's how A to B won't be the same as B to C, which is why it's super important to not see a coach's minimum as the end destination. Like, the minimum commitment that you give a coach is only the beginning to so much more. And if you think that you're going to get all the results that you want in that minimum with your coach, you're setting yourself up for failure, because now you're in a rush. Oh, I only have a 3-month minimum this thing, I need to get to the end of that. Or I have a 4-month minimum or a 6-month minimum. I have to get all my results in this period of time. And that sense of urgency is what holds, let's say, 90% of people back, because I've seen it way too often.
Yeah, man, that's a great point. And I would say that I think that sense of urgency comes from, one, I think having a certain expectation with achieving a certain result. But it's with that expectation, there's potentially a coupling of misunderstanding what it takes to actually get there. And perhaps when you start with a coach and you begin to dive deeper into what is actually going on, then it could be the case that the lack of clarity that you had going into it may all of a sudden tear that expectation apart. But then to lose that expectation, to lose that hope of like, oh, I'll get that result in 3 months, or I'll get that result in 6 months, that's a pretty hard pill to swallow, because now you're like, oh shit, I may get my results in a year, or it may be a year and 3 months, or it's not going to be 6 months from what I'm seeing here. It's a very hard pill to swallow, because now all of a sudden there's this waiting game that you were not expecting at all, and the waiting game may be something that you're just not willing to wait for, right? Because the expectation is that strong, that desire to get there is that strong. And I think, and this is hard to say, but I think a lot of one's ego has a lot to do with not willing to let go of that, just because it can be very hard. It's kind of like it's like your dad telling you, or your mom telling you, you're going to go to the toy store, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh, the toy store is closed for 3 months. Like, what? And it can be really hard. And I think this is where a mindset shift comes in, where why is it so urgent? Or rather, not that, but rather looking at the macro versus the micro. So what I mean by that is looking at the macro being your ultimate end goal, and then completely missing the micro goals that would build up to getting to the macro, because A to B may turn to A to Z, where you had all these steps that you didn't realize needed to happen in order to get to the end goal, right? It's not necessarily going to be, I signed up with a coach and then I should get my results in 3 months, or I should get my results in 6 months. It really is more so, I signed up with a coach and I'm going to finally kind of learn about what's actually happening. I'm going to get some clarity behind what's actually happening. And that clarity may end up resulting in a longer time frame than I hoped for. But before one gets really discouraged by that, I think it's really important to understand that, going back to that concept of a journey, there are these goals that are going to happen, like these micro goals that are going to happen along the way. So it's not like you're not going to experience any sort of winning when you're doing this thing, right? Like, obviously you want that macro goal, you want that end goal, but in order to get there, you're going to most likely experience smaller achievements that are going to compound over each other. And then it's going to build momentum. And the next thing you know, you finally are at your macro goal. So I think becoming comfortable with the idea of delayed gratification, along with the, I would say, the acceptance. Yeah, the acceptance of learning about your body, like literally getting to know yourself. Like you're literally getting to know yourself on a deeper level, and kind of embracing that, right? Because this is kind of how you got here in the first place, where you're at point A, but you want to get to point B, where there was some sort of disconnect between your knowledge with your body and kind of the application of how to make it better.
I think,
and so
no, that part there's a mismatch between what you know and what you come to believe, and that part right there is where a lot of people let themselves down, and that's where it's not willpower, it's not discipline, it's not motivation, it's the fact that what you think is true is actually so far from what is true.
Yeah, I call this environmental intelligence, where depending on your chosen environment, like, because you choose what you ultimately bring into your life, you may inadvertently be limiting a certain type of knowledge that would be necessary to progress, right? And when you decide to expand your environment and to expand your environmental intelligence, it could be painful, because you may find out that what you believed was actually incorrect, and that there's a slew of information that is actually correct, and most importantly, applicable to you, right? Because there's a lot of correct information, but what out of that correct information, what is actually applicable to you? And I think that's where
I don't want to lose that train of that right there, because that's exactly what I was talking about with you hear what suits your own narrative. So until you become aware of what's holding you back, you're going to keep listening to that same narrative. That environmental thing that you just explained it perfectly. that was so perfect. It's that bias. You will have that bias until you have someone to show you where you're getting stuck, which is exactly where sometimes just asking more and more questions is going to keep you stuck in the same loop instead of just going through the process and learning for yourself. Did you have anything to add to that, Sarah? That was good.
No, I think like he definitely nailed it. Yeah, he nailed that one.
That was, you like tied everything together in what you just said, because you got the bias from what we hear from groups, what we see online. Even if you look at your explore feed, it's all the shit that you're so used to seeing. It's just reaffirming why you're stuck in the first place. It takes time to build yourself out of that, and you need to be patient for that. So
yeah, you're putting yourself in an echo chamber, and until you remove yourself from that, you won't see what actually is true or what's real or what's needed.
Yeah. To sum that up, I want Sarah to touch on exactly why our best clients are the clients that have been with us for a good year or 2 or 3, because they're the ones, yeah, because honestly that they are the ones that we see the best results with.
Yeah, to kind of go back to what you were talking about in terms of like getting from A to B is not the same as getting from B to C, or building those habits, right? And this takes this takes years sometimes. I've been at this for 10 years. I've been doing this, and this has been my life, and this has been my lifestyle for 10 years, and I'm still constantly improving and changing things. But with clients that are successful in this, is they're consistent in their habits. They build a lifestyle. It's not just a season. It's not just I'm going to get fit for bathing suit season. It's I'm going to do this, and this is going to be a big part of my life. Because once you kind of establish that foundational habit of just regular exercise, regular movement, just kind of really kind of paying attention to what it is that you're putting into your body. Once you establish those foundations, that's what you build upon. if you're just trying to do this for a season, you're literally building a house of cards on sand. It's just going to come tumbling down, and you're going to keep trying to do that. But our most successful clients are the ones that are consistent. They show up and do the work that they need so that we as a coach can continue to build upon those things and bring in those nuances and small adjustments that bring about big results. But it doesn't happen in just 3 months. You know, we have clients that have been with us for 3 years that we have been able to go through cycles of fat loss and maintenance and building and just continually improving their physique through nuances in their nutrition and their training and just how they're approaching like stress and sleep and you know, digestion, all of those things. They're all such a huge part of this picture that many people are leaving out. You know, mainstream fitness, you know, has done a really good job at fooling millions of people into believing that the only thing that matters for optimal health is eat more or eat less, move more, and take these supplements. When in reality, it's your recovery, your cardio, your training, your sleep, your stress, your supplementation, your daily movement, your NEAT, your training. All of those things matter. It's not just, you know, it's not just cut and dry. It's not just black and white. And how those things are divided are going to be dependent on the individual, but we can't do that in a short amount of time with someone. You know, being able to adjust those things and optimize those things, it takes time, it takes effort on both ends, from the client side and from the coach's side, to be able to really optimize just your overall health and your physique. So, you know, being someone that shows up and that does their part in hitting the foundational things is what is going to allow us to build upon those things to get you to that next level. We can't build if you're not doing the work.
I love that. That's such a perfect. We can't build if you're not doing the work, and that's all it really comes down to: being realistic with the stuff you're putting in. And like Sarah said, it's a lifestyle, and the thing is, you're keeping it. It's not something that you get transiently. It's something that is permanent because you're building it in the process of living, and it fits into your life. So it doesn't even feel like a burden on you because you're becoming that person. So with that, this is going to be the end of episode 2 of the 2 episodes that I will split this podcast into, which is exactly what I wanted to do, because there is always so much gold when the 3 of us mesh together. So with that, I'm going to put Kenny.Lipton on Instagram and sarahsl.fit on Instagram down below. But you can go through to episode 197, I think it was. But if you open up 100% Real with Ruby and type in Lipton, you will find the other 3 episodes we did as well. I will actually link them down below too, or I'll put the numbers down so you can actually go find them, because they were really big hits, because it was about being proactive, not reactive. Because the more proactive you are, you're going to avoid a lot of the shit that we spoke about today, and you're going to be someone who feels in control of everything that they do. So is there anything that you want to sum up with?
I just want to tell everybody that's listening, your body is not a trend.
Love that.
Period.
Ooh,
It's not a trend.
damn.
So stop treating it like it's a trend. It's unfortunate that you know, fitness or body trends are a thing, but your body isn't one.
He's trying to match you.
Yeah, I'm like, how the hell do I follow with that? Man, I guess I would say be willing to be flexible with your expectations, and don't fall into the trap of closing off or limiting your environmental intelligence. Like, you want to make sure that you're aware and trying to actively learn from your coach. And yeah, I think Sarah, I mean, that was a really good, I can't really top that. That was good.
Be active in your approach. Don't be just like, don't watch from the sidelines. You need to be active to get the results that you want. So with that, thank you for listening. Reach out to any 3 of us and let us know what you gained from this. If you share it, do tag us. Don't just share it and not tag us because we really want to say thank you. But honestly, if there is anything at all that any of you girls listening to this need, just shoot any three of us a message and we will get back to that. There's a new question and answers feature on Spotify, and there's always been a rating thing, so you can do both of those things. But yeah, with that, you will actually hear me on the next episode that I do. See yous.